Hey guys! Tonight we descend into the gently echoing stillness of the Underworld, a place of shadows, stone corridors, and a rather underappreciated god who rarely got out much. You're standing at the entrance now, staring at a landscape that looks like someone took a cave system, a quiet museum, and a filing cabinet and mashed them all together under the earth. There's no screaming, no fire, just a vague sense that everyone here has an appointment. And waiting at the center of it all, seated on a throne that's probably made of obsidian or something equally dramatic, is Hades. You probably won't survive this, not because it's dangerous, but because the emotional paperwork of this place alone would send you running. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're tuning in from the land of the living, go ahead and drop your location and local time in the comments. I always love to see where you're listening from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The Underworld is not a place you stumble into accidentally, unless, of course, you're a mythological hero with poor decision-making skills. But for the average ancient Greek, it was the final destination, mandatory, non-refundable, and completely lacking in a return policy. And Hades? He was the very still, very organized custodian of it all. You picture him not as evil, not exactly, but more like an overworked librarian who's just trying to maintain silence while everyone else is yelling about drama upstairs. No pitchfork, no fiery rage, just robes, a crown that may or may not be black, and a general vibe that says, "Don't make this harder than it has to be." The realm itself reflects this energy. The air feels like it's muffled under layers of wool. The landscape isn't terrifying, it's bureaucratic. There are rivers with jobs, gates with moods, judges with more robes than sense. The Underworld is less a horror show and more an ancient version of the Department of Eternal Records. And Hades is at the center of it, not brooding, not exactly, but certainly monitoring. He didn't build this place from scratch. According to the myths, it was always there, just waiting for someone to manage it. When he and his brothers Zeus and Poseidon split up the cosmos, Hades drew the short straw, or the longest, depending on how you feel about crowds and stormy oceans. Historians still argue whether Hades truly resented the role or secretly preferred it. Some texts hint at bitterness, that he envied Olympus with its ambrosia, gold, and perpetual sibling chaos. Others suggest he liked the solitude. After all, no one really questioned his authority down here. No thunderbolts, no tempests, just quiet. The first thing you notice as you explore is how subtly it's designed. This is not a place made for the living. The walls feel too close, and yet the ceiling is high and always just out of view. Everything is dim, but not dark. The ground doesn't echo your footsteps. It absorbs them. And the souls? They don't wander aimlessly. They queue, because in Hades' realm, everything has a place. One river takes you in, another makes you forget. A third one makes you swear oaths you absolutely regret. It's a whole hydrological system of metaphysical paperwork. You'd almost admire it, if it didn't mean your entire afterlife depended on remembering not to drink from the wrong one. And standing calmly amid all this, a little tired, a little emotionally closed off, is the god himself. He isn't like Zeus. There's no thunder, no flashy entrances. He walks into a room and it simply gets quieter. People And by people, we mostly mean ghosts. Just instinctively stop talking. There's power in that. Of course, you don't get to meet him right away. There's a system, a protocol. You have to cross a river, be judged, some be sorted. It's Hogwarts for the eternally expired. Only after all that might you catch a glimpse of him, maybe from behind a curtain. And when you do, you realize something odd. He doesn't look like he wants to be anywhere else. There's no longing in his eyes, no distant gaze toward the heavens. He's not checking the calendar, waiting for spring. He's reading a ledger. He's adjusting the temperature of the lethe. He's ensuring that the gates don't creak, because that's unsettling for the newer arrivals. It's not glamorous, but it's effective. Hades rarely leaves because he doesn't need to. His realm doesn't demand spectacle, it demands structure. And he, more than any other god, is suited to the task of keeping an infinite number of dead people from arguing about seating arrangements. So tonight, we're going to stay with him, not to judge, not to escape, just to understand. To walk the marble halls of the underworld at his side, to hear the scratch of quills, the occasional whimper of a hero who tried to cheat death, and the soft bark of Cerberus somewhere in the distance. You're not here to disturb the peace. You're here to witness the quiet power of the one God who never tried to impress anyone. And if, by the end, you find yourself admiring Hades just a little bit, well, he'll never say it aloud, but he'll know you drift deeper into the underworld now, trailing your fingers along walls that seem to absorb sound. No torches flicker here. The light is gentler, like it's being filtered through a very well-behaved fog. Somewhere behind you, the echo of the river Acheron hums faintly, always flowing in one direction, always whispering to itself. You've only just arrived, and already you're starting to understand something about Hades. He didn't ask for this job. Once upon a time, and that's how all of this begins, of course, there were 3 brothers born of Cronus and Rhea, Zeus, Poseidon, and Hades. And as with all deeply functional mythological families, their father tried to eat them, successfully, in fact, for a while. It was Hades, along with the others, who was rescued and reborn in a kind of reverse vomit miracle. You don't get a normal childhood when your nursery is someone's stomach lining. Eventually, after overthrowing their dad with the help of a sickle and some elaborate plotting, the 3 brothers stood at the edge of the cosmos and decided it was time to divide the universe like cake. They drew lots, no voting, no debate, just a celestial game of chance. Zeus got the sky, all thunderbolts and mountaintop parades. Poseidon got the sea, dramatic storms and endless of fish metaphors. And Hades? He pulled the underworld, not quite dead last, but close. Historians still argue whether this was rigged, if perhaps Zeus had a trick up his divine sleeve, or if Poseidon blinked at the wrong moment. Others think Hades got exactly what he wanted, a quiet place where no one would bother him, where order could be enforced with a single glance. Whatever the case, the lines were drawn. The earth was neutral ground, free game for divine meddling and mortal mistakes. But below, in the deep halls no sun could touch, was Hades' domain. And so he went. It's hard to picture the descent. The myths don't bother with an elevator or a staircase. You just sort of cross over, you die, and you go down. And Hades, already a full-time deity, stepped into this new role like someone slipping into boots they weren't quite sure would fit. But oh, they did. The underworld was in chaos when he arrived. It was worse. It was undefined, souls wandering aimlessly, rivers refusing to stay in their beds, judges bickering about jurisdiction. Imagine a library where every book insists it deserves a throne. That's what Hades walked into. So he started building, not with bricks or bronze, with systems. He appointed judges, he built gates, he trained a dog with 3 heads and a bark that could peel paint. He created layers. Elysium for the lucky, the Asphodel Meadows for the mildly okay, and Tartarus for the truly regrettable. Every soul had a place, and if they didn't, he found one for them. Hades didn't want worship, so he wanted structure. You see, unlike Zeus, who craved attention, and Poseidon, who demanded tribute, Hades dealt in something more dependable than praise, inevitability. You can skip sacrifices, you can forget prayers, but everyone dies eventually. And Hades, he would be waiting, not gloating, not grinning, just waiting with a scroll in one hand and a cup of pomegranate wine in the other. People often misunderstand Hades. They confuse him with death itself, with Thanatos, the silent shadow who arrives when your candle flickers out. But Hades isn't the one who takes you. He's just the one who manages what happens after. In modern terms, he's not the executioner. He's the office administrator who takes your file, stamps it, and guides you to the appropriate hallway, efficient, unbothered, unfailingly polite, if a bit distant. He rarely left the underworld, not because he was trapped, but because he didn't need to. His job wasn't about mingling with mortals or meddling in their love lives. That was more Aphrodite's hobby. Hades was too busy making sure no one tried to escape, and someone always tried. You imagine him watching from a shadowed balcony as yet another hero with too much confidence and not enough foresight charges in to rescue someone. Orpheus, Heracles, Theseus, always stomping in, always underestimating the paperwork. Hades lets them try. He knows how the story ends. Down here, time doesn't pass the way it does above. It stretches, it folds, it naps. Hades isn't aging. He's not waiting for retirement. He's becoming the underworld as much as ruling it. He and the place are indistinguishable now, both quiet, both absolute, both oddly necessary. Even the other gods respect this, or fear it, maybe both. Zeus may command the sky, but he doesn't really own it. It shifts too often, storms too loudly. Poseidon's sea is changeable, moody. But Hades' domain, fixed, predictable, universal. He doesn't brag about it. He doesn't have to. You walk now through one of the many halls, branching off the central chamber. The ceilings slope lower here. The air cools. You pass rows of ancient stone doors, some open, some shut tight. Behind each is a myth, a memory, or a moment someone thought they'd buried. And somewhere ahead, at the end of the corridor, a lamp glows beside a massive iron desk. Papers are stacked in impeccable towers. A small flame flickers in a brazier. A quill moves on its own, taking notes in a thick leather ledger. Hades is still working, not out of ambition, out of duty. He didn't seek the throne, but someone had to sit on it, and once he did, he never left. It doesn't happen all at once. The making of a realm, even a gloomy one, takes time. You can imagine it. Hades, newly installed in the underworld, surveying the place with the expression of someone who's just inherited a manor house that hasn't been cleaned in centuries. Dust on every ledge. The walls hum with the restless whispers of improperly sorted souls. No clear signage, and not a single clipboard in sight. But Hades doesn't panic. He does what all overworked, underappreciated gods do in times of crisis. He organizes. The underworld might have existed before him, but it didn't function until he arrived. What you're standing in now, this vast, echoing empire of endings, is the result of millennia of meticulous divine management. You walk through a chamber lined with polished obsidian pillars. Each one is inscribed with names, thousands of them, mortals whose passage has been recorded, filed, and properly stored. Hades keeps immaculate records, not because he wants to remember, but because he can't afford to forget. Imagine the alternative: soul mix-ups, eternal misplacements, ghosts wandering into departments that aren't theirs, absolute chaos, worse than a queue at the Athenian tax office during festival season. So Hades built a system. He divided the realm into 3 main zones: Elysium, for the rare mortals who actually lived noble lives; the Asphodel Meadows, for the middling masses, not wicked, not heroic, just quietly average; and Tartarus, the deep, murky corner of the underworld reserved for true cosmic disasters, the mythological basement where eternal punishment does its worst impersonation of poetic justice. Historians still argue whether these divisions reflect moral judgment or simply social preference. Some say Elysium was just an aristocrat's club for favored warriors. Others think the Asphodel Meadows were punishment enough, a place so unremarkable it became unbearable. But one thing's clear: Hades needed order, and the underworld responded. The rivers stayed in their beds, mostly. The souls stopped pacing. Cerberus took up his post and only barked at those who absolutely deserved it. Even the shadows seemed to settle. What Hades created wasn't a kingdom of torment. That was later, more dramatic storytelling. He created a place where the dead could be placed, not just dropped. And over time, he became less like a ruler and more like a steward, not above the realm, but a part of it, like a tree that grows into the shape of the pot it's in. You pass by a courtyard now, not that you know it by the lighting. In the center, there's a low, circular pool. The surface doesn't ripple. There's no wind here, no weather, no time. It's just still, perfectly still, the kind of stillness that makes your heartbeat feel like an intrusion. Hades walks here sometimes, not to reflect, not to brood, simply to pause. Let the endless movement of arrivals fade into silence. Here, in this muted heart of the underworld, he can exist without decision or interruption. He rarely brings guests, but he does make exceptions, sometimes for mortals, occasionally for gods, never for the curious, always for the necessary. You can tell a lot about someone by how they decorate. Zeus has gold, thunder motifs, and ceiling murals that suggest modesty was never in his vocabulary. Poseidon prefers shells, saltwater fountains, and tridents for every occasion. Hades, his decor is all texture and shadow, smooth walls that hold the cold, furniture that blends into its surroundings, and floors that absorb footsteps like they've made peace with endings. There's no art here, no color, except for a few thin stripes of red, pomegranate juice, not blood, marking ceremonial doors. The only music is the soft lap of water in distant channels, and the occasional sigh of wind that somehow got lost on its way down. You begin to understand why Hades stays. It isn't just duty, it's fit. He doesn't need Olympus. He doesn't need banquets, or gossip, or competitive divine matchmaking. The underworld gives him exactly what the others never could: purpose, predictability, space to think. It's not for everyone, certainly. Heroes usually arrive expecting challenge, drama, something to prove. What they find instead is routine, rules, and a quiet man who looks at them like they're just another folder on his desk. But for Hades, that's the point. He doesn't perform power, he just holds it. Quietly, constantly, like a weight he's long since stopped feeling. And maybe that's why he rarely leaves, because above ground, gods are messy. Mortals are unpredictable, mountains erupt, oceans boil, temples crumble, but down here, everything stays in place. You find yourself drifting deeper still into a region of the underworld that feels even more meticulously arranged, as if someone spent an absurd number of centuries alphabetizing fog. The floors are smoother here, faintly reflective. The corridors narrow, the silence thickens, and somewhere nearby, a rustle of parchment echoes faintly. This is the heart of Hades' domain, not Tartarus, not the fields of the dead, but the throne room, or, as it might more accurately be called, the office of final affairs. It isn't ostentatious, no golden lions, no velvet cushions, just dark marble, a tall-backed chair with armrests that suggest unspoken rules, and a wide black desk where scrolls curl gently like sleeping cats. Hades sits there now, or perhaps always, one leg crossed neatly over the other, a stylus tapping rhythmically against a wax tablet. He looks up briefly as you approach, and then goes back to work, because here he is not merely a god, he is a manager. The underworld runs on routine. New arrivals are processed, old memories are archived, certain souls are flagged for special review. There are appeals, there are misfilings. Occasionally, there are disputes over river placement, and every single one ends up on Hades' desk. He doesn't frown. He doesn't smile. He simply adjusts the ledger and ensures the river of souls continues to flow uninterrupted. It's strangely comforting, unlike the high drama of Olympus, where thunder can be thrown over a bad dinner party and the gods are constantly one bad mood, away from turning into swans or trees. Hades rules with consistency. He has no interest in transformation, only in continuity. Even his throne reflects this. It's carved from a single block of basalt, smooth from use, shaped to accommodate a figure who rarely shifts in his seat. No golds, no jewels, just weight. The kind of seat that says, I've been here long enough to know that flair just gets in the way. And beside him, always, sits a stack of documents that have never been spilled, a lamp that never flickers, and a small crystal dish of pomegranate seeds, half eaten. You'd think he'd get bored, but boredom requires variation, and Hades' days, like his realm, are infinite and identical in a way that only a very specific personality type could find soothing. Historians still argue whether Hades' meticulous control stemmed from insecurity, trauma, or just a particularly intense version of divine introversion. Either way, the result is the same. The underworld runs on time. Unlike the myths above, where gods are forever interrupting feasts with lightning or racing across the sea on dolphins, nothing about Hades' rule is spontaneous. He doesn't make grand announcements. He rarely delivers speeches. His commands are more often issued as handwritten notes passed to wraith-like attendants who whisper through walls, and yet his influence is absolute. You walk now past the registry, a vaulted hall where every mortal name is etched into thin strips of shadow that scroll across the stone walls. There is no beginning, no end. The names shimmer faintly, shifting as you look. Some are fading, others have just appeared. Hades knows everyone. He doesn't comment on their lives. He doesn't judge them himself. He's above such theatricality. Judgment is outsourced to Minos, Rhadamanthus, and Aeacus, the three underworld judges, who argue in hushed tones and seem to wear too many robes for beings made of mist. But once they make their decision, Hades ensures it sticks. Even Cerberus, lounging half asleep nearby, knows the rule. Once you're placed, you stay. There's no bargaining, no appeals, no questing heroes can change that. At least not without consequence. Of course, there are always exceptions, but we'll get to those later. For now, you watch Hades stand, slowly, precisely, and step away from his desk. He doesn't pace. He glides, like someone who never needs to check where his feet are going. The air shifts subtly around him. Not a breeze, not a chill, just the awareness that something important is in motion. He pauses near the center of the chamber, looks up, and for a moment you think he might speak. He doesn't. Instead, he lifts a hand, not high, just enough, and the entire chamber stills. Somewhere in the distance, the sound of flowing water quiets. A flickering torch smooths into calm. Even the shadow of Cerberus, already half asleep, stops twitching. That's the power of Hades. Not noise, stillness. He returns to his desk without flourish, sits, resumes his work. Another scroll, another decision, another fragment of eternity filed away with the quiet efficiency of someone who knows that drama is for amateurs. You step back, reverently. You don't bow. That would be absurd. But you feel something like respect settle in your chest, because in a world full of gods, with fire and chaos and endless ego, Hades remains still, and he stays here, not because he must, but because someone has to. You leave the throne room behind, not because you've been dismissed, but because Hades has simply resumed his paperwork, and there's a quiet understanding that nothing more will be said. There's nothing more to say. His realm, however, still has much to show you. You follow a corridor that grows cooler with each step, not uncomfortably so, just crisp, like air that's never been breathed. The stone underfoot is worn smooth, not from the trampling of thousands, but from the same footsteps, repeated forever, and then ahead you hear it. Not a roar, not a splash, a kind of wet murmur, like someone pouring water too slowly. A river, but not just any river. The river Styx, you've heard of it, of course. Everyone has. It's the one with the oaths, the crossing, the spooky fog that clings to your ankles like a cat that refuses to be ignored. But what they don't tell you is that it's underwhelming. At first glance, the Styx looks like an overgrown drainage canal. Dark water, not quite black, but the color of forgotten ink. It moves slowly, deliberately, without ripples. The surface reflects nothing. You look down and see not your face, but your possibility of regret. Hades didn't invent the Styx. It existed long before him, a primordial boundary, older than any god, older even than the earth itself, they say. It's not part of his architecture, not exactly, but he manages it now, like someone who inherited a cantankerous pet with a long lifespan and no discernible affection. The river isn't wide, but it's not shallow either. It's the kind of body of water that feels like it might go down forever, full of broken promises and half-finished epics. To cross, of course, you need a ferry, and that means Charon. You spot him before he speaks, tall, wrapped in robes that might once have been black, now just the color of night air. His hands are large, knotted, more bone than flesh. He doesn't blink. You suspect he doesn't even have to. The boat behind him looks like something that creaked out of a nightmare shipyard. Low, long, and far too narrow for your taste. He extends a hand. You don't have a coin, but you're not dead either, just visiting. So he hesitates, then gestures silently for you to step in anyway. You do, with the grace of someone deeply aware that tipping into the sticks probably isn't covered by any travel insurance. The boat rocks once, settles, Charon rows, you glide across in silence. There's no conversation, no commentary, just the lapping of water that somehow makes no sound and the sensation that time is compressing, like you're not just moving across the river, but through something essential. Historians still argue whether the Styx was believed to erase memory, grant power, or simply serve as a celestial toll road. Some say drinking from it gave invulnerability. Others claim it gave migraines and an irresistible urge to monologue. But what's certain is this: no oath made on the Styx can be broken. Even the gods fear that. You try not to think about what's in the water, not souls exactly, not fish, something else, something quieter. You glance down once and immediately regret it. There's a flash, not of movement, but of meaning. You see your childhood toy, a name you forgot, the feeling you had that time it rained in the orchard and you didn't go inside, you look away. Karen rose. Eventually, the boat thuds against the far bank. If you can call it that, it's less a shore and more a threshold. Mist curls around your legs. A set of stone steps appears in the gloom. You step out. Karen does not wave goodbye. The Styx continues behind you, slowly digesting history. You stand on the bank, looking at the path ahead. You've crossed the most feared river in myth, and it was so fine, a little damp, surprisingly introspective. And now, you're one step deeper into the underworld. Hades never crosses this river, not personally. There's no need. His realm begins on both sides, but the crossing is symbolic. A boundary not just between life and death, but between expectation and reality. And here's the thing most people get wrong. The underworld isn't punishment, it's placement. It's where you go when you're done, and crossing the Styx is how you mark that ending, with a boat ride, a toll, and a ferry operator who takes his job far more seriously than most public transit workers. You begin up the steps and deeper into the fog, and behind you, the Styx whispers, not words, not warnings, just reminders. The steps from the Styx don't creak. They don't echo either. In fact, walking here feels like stepping through someone else's memory. Soundless, smooth, slightly too quiet for comfort. The mist is less dense now, thinning into something that feels like the breath of forgotten stories. Ahead you see it. It's a structure, not grand, but immensely present, built from dark stone and shaped more like a courthouse than a palace. This is where the paperwork of the dead is handled. You've arrived at the Registry of Final Affairs, sometimes called the Hall of Records, but more often referred to by shades with a shrug and a sigh as the place where you wait. You approach the doors, which open without sound, naturally. Inside, the space widens dramatically. Columns rise on either side like petrified trees. Between them float shelves, yes, floating, lined with scrolls that unroll themselves slightly whenever you look away. Above, ghostly script writes itself across the ceiling and fades before you can read it. This is Hades's true power, not thunder, not floods, not curses, it's administration. The room is full of attendants, not the wailing ghosts or banshees you might expect, but pale, silent, robe-clad figures with arms full of scrolls and expressions that suggest they've never once lost a quill. They shuffle back and forth with eerie grace, cataloging the entire history of death without complaint or coffee. You watch one ghost, a recently arrived soul, judging by the disoriented expression and lack of shoes, step tentatively toward a desk. An attendant greets them with a nod, unfurls a scroll that seems to hum softly, and stamps it with a seal shaped like a pomegranate, split in half. Approved Jit's next, the process repeats, again and again. Lives reduced to parchment, choices distilled into columns, 1,000 destinies flickering into bureaucratic resolution. There's something oddly beautiful about it. Nothing is rushed, nothing is delayed, everything is handled. It's hard to imagine Hades designing this himself, but the truth is no one else could have. This isn't just order, it's the final kind of order, the kind that doesn't negotiate or apologize. And unlike the laws of Olympus, which tend to change depending on how loud Zeus is yelling, these rules are firm. Of course, there are quirks. You notice a scroll that floats gently above a desk, refusing to land. The attendant below sighs, adjusts their hood, and begins whispering to it. The soul in question, a sheepish-looking man with a toga slightly askew, appears to be the victim of overlapping myths. Historians still argue whether some souls in Greek lore were individuals or composites, if, perhaps, multiple tales got rolled into one character, like a badly edited anthology. In Hades' registry, those errors must be resolved. You don't want someone destined for the Asphodel Meadows wandering into Tartarus just because of a clerical legend merger. Nearby, another soul is quietly insisting they lived a heroic life. The attendant, unflustered, simply points to a column of numbers, perhaps good deeds performed, perhaps the ratio of hubris to humility. The soul sighs. They knew, they just wanted to try. In the center of the chamber stands a raised platform. Upon it sits a device you don't fully understand, a contraption of glass and shadow, and thread-thin gold lines that intersect like a spiderweb drawn by a mathematician. It pulses softly when a name is stamped. You suspect it records the moment, forever. And above it all, a small balcony. You spot the edge of a dark rope, the tip of a sandal. Hades is watching, not judging, not interfering, just watching, ensuring the flow continues, ensuring that the system is respected. He didn't create death. He doesn't take lives, but once they're gone, he ensures they're seen. This isn't glamorous work. There are no epics about underworld registries, no odes to the importance of accurate soul labeling, but it's what holds the myth together, the part no one sings about, because it isn't exciting, it's just necessary. You stroll past a long scroll, one end pinned under a paperweight, shaped like a fig. You glimpse a few names, some are ancient, some suspiciously modern. The Underworld, it seems, updates in real time. Some say there's even a section of the registry for those who never existed, but were imagined so vividly that the Underworld had to make room anyway. Those names float in a separate hall, visited only by poets and very confused librarians. You pause near a writing desk. A thin, nearly invisible figure scribbles with astonishing speed. The pen never lifts, the ink never fades, the parchment grows without ever needing to be unrolled. You think of your own name, whether it's already here, whether it's spelled correctly. Probably. This is Hades' domain. Mistakes are rare. Still, the thought sends a faint chill through you, the soft kind, like when someone says your name in a dream. You turn to leave, the doors open again. You step back into the corridor, past the silent queue, the steady procession of souls, the endless hum of sordid lives. Behind you, the registry continues, never loud, never wrong, just eternally recording. You walk now toward another corridor, narrower, more dimly lit, with a smell that's not unpleasant, just very old. the kind of scent that settles into old pages and solemn places. You pass a series of arches carved with strange glyphs. They aren't warnings. They're directions. They tell you where to stand, where not to wander, where the judges are, because next comes judgment. Not yours, of course. You're just visiting. But nearby, you can hear the murmur of deliberation, the soft shuffle of sandals on stone, and the faint but unmistakable sigh of a soul who just realized they probably should have been nicer to their cousin back in 430 BCE. The judgment hall is grand, not golden, not glowing, but serious, like a law court staffed entirely by men who never crack a smile unless it's followed by a citation. 3 thrones face forward in a shallow semicircle. Seated upon them, Minos, Rhadamanthus, and Iacchus. No one can quite agree on who has seniority, not even the judges themselves, so they take turns leading the discussions in a bureaucratic ballet choreographed by eternity. Minos, once king of Crete, sits tallest. His expression suggests he's still waiting for someone to properly apologize for the labyrinth situation. Rhadamanthus looks tired but fair, the kind of judge who probably smells like parchment and judgment. Iacchus, the quietest, peers at each soul as if he can see the exact number of figs they once stole. Together they hear each case. Not a trial exactly. There are no lawyers, no dramatic reveals, just the recitation of facts, feelings, and what you might call vibes. The soul speaks. The judges listen. Then they consult scrolls. Sometimes they argue. More often, they nod together and announce a verdict in voices that are never raised, but always final. It's not fast, but it's fair. Hades doesn't interfere in these proceedings. He trusts the process, or perhaps more accurately, he maintains the process and lets it work as intended. His only rule is that once judged that the soul must go. No loitering, no appeals, no second opinions from visiting philosophers. Historians still argue whether these 3 judges were real kings, mythic symbols, or just stand-ins for different types of morality. Some say Minos judged Europeans, Rhadamanthus handled Asians, and Iacchus got everyone else. Others think the division was thematic: justice, compassion, and impartiality. Whatever the case, the souls take it seriously. You can tell. They stand a little straighter. Their answers are careful. Their regrets are louder in the silence. You watch a soul approach the dais, a woman dressed in what might once have been royal robes. Her voice is soft, but her story unfolds clearly. A life of kindness edged with pride, charity balanced by occasional cruelty, and a single betrayal that even now stings in her voice. The judges lean in, they confer. Rhadamanthus looks thoughtful, Iacchus nods slightly, Minos raises a hand, and the chamber stills. As asphodel, he says. The soul bows. No protest, no wailing, just a quiet acceptance. She turns and is guided away by one of Hades' attendants, robed in the soft gray that marks those who manage transitions, not punishments. You glance around the chamber. The walls are inscribed with quotes, not from gods, but from mortals. Reflections on guilt, mercy memories, some are poems, others are just names. This, you realize, is where the underworld feels most human, not because of the punishment, but because of the recognition. Each soul here is seen, not just tallied, their lives weighed, not counted, their choices remembered, not erased. Of course, some souls are more complicated. You overhear the judges discussing one, a poet who delighted in chaos but gave all his wealth to the poor. His words inspired revolutions, some beautiful, some terrible. His lovers speak of kindness. His rivals speak of schemes, the judges are split. Eventually, they send him to the meadows. Let him wander. Let time do what judgment cannot. Not every case is so finely balanced. Some souls try to bargain. They plead, they cry. The judges do not flinch. They've heard every excuse since language was invented. You leave the hall as another case begins. A warrior, perhaps, judging by the way he puffs out his chest, as if posturing might matter even here. It doesn't. Hades waits outside the hall, not because he's nosy, just because he likes to ensure the queue doesn't get too long, efficient even in eternity. You catch his eye. He raises an eyebrow just slightly. You get the feeling he knows exactly what you'd be judged for, but he's not going to say it aloud. Not yet. You nod. He nods back, and with that, you move on. The judgment continues behind you, endless, tireless, never unkind, because down here, justice is not a spectacle. It's just the next step. The corridor from the judgment hall narrows briefly, as if even the stone itself feels the weight of decisions made. The air smells faintly of charcoal, parchment, and, unexpectedly, something like dog breath. Not ordinary dog breath, though. You round a corner, and there he is, or they are, Cerberus, the three-headed hound of the Underworld, lounging across the width of a wide basalt hall like he owns the place, which in a way he does. Each head is massive, one resting gently on its paws, another watching you with a slow blink, and the third busy licking an invisible itch with the sort of determination reserved for gods and very committed terriers. And yes, all three heads are drooling. Cerberus isn't just the Underworld's guard dog. He's the security system, part alarm, part bouncer, part emotional support beast, and wholly misunderstood. When Hades first took up his duties, he realized something important. People, especially dead ones, are incredibly bad at following instructions. Some tried to leave, some wandered off, some didn't even know they were dead. What Hades needed was a solution that didn't involve yelling or follow-up paperwork. So he raised a puppy, a very large, very loyal, very multi-headed puppy. Cerberus was a gift, maybe from Echidna, the mother of monsters, or from the Underworld itself. Historians still argue whether he was born of chaos, designed by mythic forces, or simply a magical fluke. Either way, he grew fast and learned quickly. Sit, stay, fetch, guard the passage of souls for all eternity. Simple tasks. You walk slowly, not out of fear, more out of respect. Cerberus watches. One head yawns, another lets out a low, soft huff that stirs the dust. The third, the most alert, sniffs the air in your direction, and then, unexpectedly, sneezes. It echoes like a cannon through the hall. You pause. Cerberus settles back down. No growls, no barred teeth, or he's not here to threaten visitors. Just to make sure nobody unauthorized goes either way. He's Hades's favorite companion, probably his only companion, depending on Persephone's travel schedule. The two are often seen together, Cerberus loping beside his master, heads swiveling independently, occasionally stealing a scroll or chewing on a sandal when bored. But he's not just muscle. Cerberus knows things. You can tell. The way he sniffs the air and immediately categorizes your entire life's worth of decisions. The way he doesn't bark because he knows you're not a threat. You're just passing through. He's cataloged you already. 3 heads, 3 judgments, all agreed. You're not soup-worthy, not today. There's a story, rarely told, that once Cerberus caught a cold. Hades was beside himself. A sniffling 3-headed beast is no one's idea of fun. One head kept sneezing on the fire pit. Another drooled so excessively that important documents had to be reinscribed. And the third became unusually clingy, curling up beside Hades's throne like a massive snoring footstool. For 3 days, the underworld ran slightly less smoothly. Hades sent for all manner of mythical healers, most of whom were too scared to enter. Eventually, Persephone brewed a tincture of honey, pomegranate rind, and ambrosia. Cerberus lapped it up from a basin the size of a bathtub. He recovered. But for weeks afterward, he kept a suspicious eye on any visitor who so much as sniffled. You sit now, cautiously, on a nearby stone bench. Cerberus stretches. The floor vibrates slightly. You wonder how Hades trained him. 3 heads, 3 minds, all operating together. There's no leash, no collar, just understanding. This isn't an animal, this is a presence. The passage behind Cerberus leads to many places. Elysium, Asphodel, Tartarus. But Cerberus doesn't care where souls go, only that they go where they're meant to, and more importantly, that they stay. The story of Heracles, you recall, involves dragging Cerberus up into the mortal world. Hades didn't like that, not because he feared the beast would escape, but because the underworld had a schedule. You can't just remove the dog and expect souls not to wander off. That's poor management. Hades got Cerberus back, of course. The hound was grumpy for a week, refused to eat anything but grilled boar, and occasionally let out long, offended howls at the thought of having been manhandled by a muscle-bound demigod. But he got over it, mostly. You stand, brushing imaginary dust from your tunic. Cerberus watches you go. 3 sets of eyes, 3 pulses of calm. You nod, awkwardly but sincerely. 1 head blinks. 1 head yawns again. The third lets out a soft growl, not threatening, more like a farewell. You step past him, and the hall opens wider, the air shifting subtly again. Behind you, the enormous hound lowers his head to his paws and resumes his nap, one ear twitching occasionally at the distant rumble of the sticks. He will remain here, always, the keeper of thresholds, the gate that breathes, the guardian no soul dares defy, because while Hades may rule the underworld, it is Cerberus who keeps it whole. You walk on, past the soft snores of Cerberus, deeper into the stillness that stretches between realms. The corridors twist slightly now, not with confusion, but with intention, the kind of layout designed by someone who values privacy over aesthetics. Eventually, the path opens into a vast chamber, low-lit and hushed. The walls are draped in black velvet, the floor layered with rugs so thick your steps disappear into them. In the center, a round table. Around it, chairs, none matching, each clearly meant for someone no longer living. Welcome to the dining hall of the dead. Yes, really, it's not a grand banquet in the Olympian style. There are no golden goblets, no endless fountains of wine. Here the dinners are smaller, quieter, and, let's be honest, much less enthusiastic, because no matter how you dress it up, it's still dinner with Hades. He sits at the head of the table, always the same place, never early, never late. His meals are more symbolic than nutritional. Pomegranate seeds, black olives, dark bread, and wine that probably tastes like forgotten memories. It isn't about the food, it's about the gesture. You can imagine it now. A handful of notable souls gathered around the table, Sappho perhaps, humming quietly into her wine, Leonidas staring at a crust of bread like it owes him money, a confused Roman bureaucrat in full armor trying to cut cheese with a gladius. The table creaks as someone shifts. Conversation is rare, but not forbidden. Mostly it's polite silence, broken occasionally by a coughing ghost or the soft whimper of a soul who still isn't used to being dead. Hades, he eats slowly, deliberately, not to intimidate. He's not a tyrant, but because he's in no rush. Eternity doesn't demand seconds. You glance around and notice the lighting or the lack of it. The chamber is lit from below, not by flames, but by something cooler, gentler, like moonlight caught in water. It leaves shadows in odd places, casting the table in permanent twilight. You're never sure if it's dinner, breakfast, or something in between. Time here doesn't declare itself. One corner of the room holds a strange cabinet. Inside, a collection of tokens, trinkets, small strange items left behind by those who dined here before, a soldier's insignia, a broken lyre string, a single sandal. No one touches them. Even the dust seems reverent. You imagine Hades collecting these himself, not because he's sentimental, but because he remembers everything. And once in a while, very rarely, he hosts one of these little gatherings, not to socialize, not to brag, simply to acknowledge. Some lives were loud, some were long, some were utterly ordinary. But if they left a mark, they get one dinner, one chance to sit at the same table where gods once quietly nodded in approval. Historians still argue whether these dinners are myths layered over tradition, or if they were part of real funerary rites among certain cults. Some believe the idea of dining with Hades reflected a rare glimpse of mercy, that even the god of the dead understood the importance of a final meal. Others think it was simply a way to make the unknown a little less terrifying. After all, how scary can death be if it includes snacks and civil conversation? You're not invited tonight. You're only observing. But Hades glances your way for just a moment. There's no smile, but something in the tilt of his head suggests tolerance. That's high praise down here. He raises a glass slowly and drinks. No toasts, no speeches, just presence. One by one, the souls finish their meals. Some vanish. Some return to their afterlife assignments. One, a philosopher who clearly doesn't know when to stop talking, is gently ushered out by an attendant with the blank patience of someone who's done this several thousand times. The table clears itself. The plates vanish. The light fades further, and Hades remains. He always finishes last, not out of pride, out of habit. You leave the hall quietly, your footsteps swallowed by the rugs. Behind you, the door closes with the softest click you've ever heard. Another dinner is done, no fanfare, no applause, just a little moment in eternity, shared with the one God who remembers everyone. You leave the dining hall behind and follow a corridor that winds upward, not sharply, but with a slope so gentle you barely feel it. The walls grow rougher here, less polished, the ceiling lowers, and with every step, the air grows slightly warmer, though never uncomfortably so. You're heading toward a place most souls never see, not because it's forbidden, but because it's irrelevant to the majority. A chamber tucked high in the ceiling of the underworld, nestled like a thought Hades only has once in a while. It's called many things: the solarium, the upper hollow, the forgotten balcony, but most simply refer to it as the place where the light sometimes comes. You arrive, and there it is, a wide, circular platform ringed by craggy stone windows, not open to the sky. There's no sky in the underworld, but open nonetheless. The light that enters here is soft, filtered, indirect, not golden, not white, more like the memory of light. It dances faintly on the floor in wavering patterns. The air smells faintly of iron, moss, and parchment left in the sun. It's the closest thing to daylight this realm ever offers. Hades comes here more often than you'd expect. Not daily, not scheduled, but when he needs a moment, not a break, just a pause. To look outward, not up, just away. There's no throne here, no furniture, just one long bench carved from a single piece of obsidian, positioned to catch the faintest ray of whatever that not light might be. You sit, the stone is cool but welcoming. The view, strangely vast outside, you see, not the world above, but layers of shadow, stretching toward what might be the mortal realm. Wisps of color flicker now and then. Blues, pale greens, distant reds, like the after images of stories, too old to remember properly. This is where Hades thinks, not about power or plots. That's more Zeus' domain. Here, he considers the rhythms of things, the way souls arrive in clusters after wars, the way certain names repeat every few generations, like echoing footsteps through time. He keeps no journal, no notes, just observations. Some say he can see into the mortal world from here, not in clarity, but like a shape seen through thick glass. He never interferes. That's not his role. But he watches sometimes, quietly. Historians still argue whether this balcony has ever been described in original myth, or if it's purely poetic invention layered over the god's personality. Some say it was created by Persephone, a gift to her husband, a space where he might feel less buried. Others think it formed on its own, shaped by his need for an ending that didn't feel like closure. There's something peaceful here, not joyful, not sorrowful, just complete. You see signs that Hades comes often. The floor near the bench is smoother, worn by centuries of footsteps. There are tiny grooves on the windowsill, perhaps where he drums his fingers while thinking, or marks time with an old habit he's long forgotten he does. You picture him here, alone, cloak wrapped tightly, hands folded, eyes narrowed at the horizon that never changes. Maybe thinking about how many souls arrived this decade, maybe wondering if anyone remembers to tend to the fields of asphodel during festival weeks, or maybe, just maybe, remembering the one time a mortal brought him honey cake and didn't ask for anything in return. Hades doesn't long for Olympus, but he might sometimes long for something like simplicity. No souls, no rivers, no ledgers, just a moment of stillness. You rise and walk toward the windows. There's no glass, nothing to smudge or clean, just open space, and beyond it, the mystery of the world that once buzzed so loudly above. You reach your hand toward the light. It doesn't warm your skin. It doesn't pass through you. It just acknowledges you. A breeze, impossible, but undeniable, stirs through the chamber. You're not alone. You turn. Hades stands at the entrance, silent. He doesn't speak, doesn't gesture. He doesn't need to. This place isn't off limits. It's simply rarely visited. He walks to the bench, sits, crosses his legs, the faintest creak of leather. His eyes rest on the same not horizon. You think he's going to say something profound, final, timeless. Instead, he exhales softly. Just air, just breath, just being. And you realize this balcony isn't about escape. It's about awareness. Even the god of the dead sometimes needs to look outward and remember that existence continues. Not above, not below, but somewhere else. You let the silence stretch. Then slowly you leave. Behind you, the light flickers once, and Hades watches the horizon that never ends. The corridor descending from the solarium narrows quickly, swallowing the memory of that light as if embarrassed to have allowed such sentiment in. You find yourself back in familiar stone, cool, textured, silent. And as you walk, a strange realization creeps in. No one down here prays to Hades, not often anyway, not in the way mortals scatter olives to Athena or compose barroom chants to Dionysus. There are no temples bustling with festivals, no parades of scented oils and sacrificial goats. There are no songs, and yet, everyone meets him eventually. Hades has no cult, no mass following, no branded merchandise. You'd never find his face etched on a coin next to a lightning bolt. His power isn't built on adoration, but on inevitability. He doesn't need your attention. He already has your appointment booked. That's not to say there weren't shrines. There were small ones, discreet, usually near caves or cliffs, places where the veil between worlds felt particularly thin. Offerings were made in silence. Black rams, coins, a few whispered hopes slipped into cracks in the stone. Mortals didn't ask Hades for favors. They asked for absence. "Don't come for me just yet," they'd mutter, "not today." Even the name Hades was spoken softly, if at all. Euphemisms were common. The unseen one, the silent king, he who receives. Greeks weren't superstitious about all gods, but this one, best not to draw his attention, best to let the ledger fill at its own pace. Historians still argue whether this reverent distance was cultural caution, metaphysical terror, or simply an acknowledgement that Hades, unlike other gods, didn't care for applause. He wasn't vain. He wasn't hungry for prayers. He was already full of everything that ever lived. You enter a long gallery now, curving gently to the right. Along the walls are carved niches, each holding a statue or bust of someone who once mattered. Judges, poets, monarchs, philosophers, some you recognize, most you don't. No one has dusted them in centuries, and yet they seem immaculate. This is how Hades honors those who came through with dignity, not with altars or flattery, but with permanence. He remembers those who accepted the end without bargaining, who treated death not as a punishment, but as part of the story. There's a niche left empty, waiting, not ominously, just patiently. You wonder if it's for someone famous, or maybe just someone remarkably unremarkable. That's the thing about Hades. He doesn't favor the bold or the brilliant. He favors the honest. You lived, you ended, so that's enough. You stop at a pedestal with no name, just a single offering bowl filled with dust. Inside, a few faded petals, a dried fig, and a tiny carved fish. Maybe once, long ago, a soul made an offering here, not out of fear, but out of a strange, slow-growing respect. There are myths, too, not the flashy kind, but the quiet ones. Old fishermen who poured wine into the waves before sailing. Farm wives who left a handful of barley in the corner of the barn each solstice. A child who buried her doll under the hearthstones and whispered, "Keep her company, please." These weren't prayers. They were acknowledgments, tiny, humble nods to the fact that someone was waiting in the shadows, not to steal, not to scare, but to receive. That's the word most often used for Hades in the oldest texts. Receiver, not taker, not judge, just the one who opens the door and gestures inside. And for those who understood that, who didn't rail against it or decorate it in flame, there was comfort, not joy, perhaps, but calm. You pass one final niche. Inside, a statue of Hades himself was not towering or dramatic, but life-sized, seated, head bowed slightly, hands resting on the arms of a chair. Not a throne, it's a chair. You step closer. At his feet lies Cerberus, curled up snoring in stone. In Hades' lap, a scroll, unrolled, half read. There's no expression on his face, just a stillness so deep it feels like time could settle there and take a nap. You stand for a moment, staring, and then you move on, because Hades is always watching, not to punish, not to collect, just to be there when the world is done, being everything else. Down another corridor, this one narrower, paved with black slate tiles etched in silver thread, the air takes on a different tone, not colder, not warmer, but somehow more awake. There's a shift in the scent, too, faint traces of something floral, earthy, sweet. And then you see her, Persephone. She does not make an entrance. She doesn't need to. She appears in the way spring does, gently, unmistakably, after long months of forgetting what warmth even feels like. She walks with purpose and peace in equal measure. A soft rustle in her step like wind through the petals of things that once lived. Her hair flows like river grass, her dress woven from threads of dusk and orchard fruit. And when she looks at you, calmly, directly, you feel suddenly as though you've tracked dirt into a perfectly tidy room. Persephone is many things: goddess of vegetation, daughter of Demeter, queen of the underworld. But in this realm of permanence, she is the rare pulse of change. She doesn't just bring flowers. She brings breath, not in the mortal sense, no lungs, no wind, but in the way doors creak open and forgotten rooms are filled with the hush of air moving again. And yes, Hades married her or abducted her, depending on which version of the myth you subscribe to. Historians still argue whether Persephone was a passive victim or a powerful co-ruler who saw an opportunity and seized it. Some texts speak of her weeping, others show her ascending to the throne like she was born to it. Maybe both are true, maybe neither. But here now, walking calmly through her husband's realm, Persephone does not look afraid. She looks settled, and Hades? He watches her enter each time as if it's the first. There is no grand reunion, no fireworks, no doves, just a shared glance, a nod. Two beings who understand one another completely, not in the way mortals romanticize, but in the way two rivers might flow beside each other without ever colliding. She changes things when she's here, not dramatically, subtly. A corner of the underworld blooms briefly. A hallway that once echoed now hums with a softer vibration. The black pomegranate trees bear heavier fruit. Even Cerberus follows her, slightly less drooly than usual. You notice that the stone around her glows faintly green, not bright, more like moss in moonlight. Her fingers brush a wall, and the surface warms under her touch, blooming with a pattern that fades just as quickly. She doesn't rule with fear. She doesn't command. She influences. And that may be more powerful than anything. Hades never tries to control her. Why would he? She is not his prisoner. She is his balance. For half the year, she lives among the living, coaxing wheat from the ground, bringing figs to ripeness, reminding bees what direction to fly. For the other half, she returns here, where she walks the stone paths, not like a guest, but like someone tending her winter garden. There are chambers in the underworld that only open when she's present. One holds seeds gathered from the edge of Lethe's banks, fragile and transparent, planted in rows like silent thoughts. Another is filled with vines that bloom only in silence. A third is rumored to contain every scent that has ever risen from mortal soil: loam, dew, wood smoke, a lilac, rain on dust. These are Persephone's domains, hidden, quiet, alive in the midst of death. You follow her now at a respectful distance as she enters a room lined with mirrors that do not reflect the present. Instead, they shimmer with beginnings. A child's first steps, a sprouting root, the moment a laugh bubbles up unplanned. Persephone touches one. It shows a farmer pulling a single radish from the soil, smiling to himself as though he's just unearthed treasure. She smiles too, a small one, then moves on. She doesn't linger. She doesn't boast. She simply is. You imagine what it must be like, 6 months above, 6 below, carrying the burden of rebirth and decay in alternating fists, knowing that nothing can bloom without also eventually ending. And Hades, he lets her go, every time, without tantrum, without thunder, because he knows she returns, not out of obligation, but out of rhythm. They are not like Zeus and Hera, storming about in jealousy and curses. They are inevitability and change. A cycle older than storytelling. You see them later, walking the quietest corridor side by side, not touching, just present, two gods, once feared and misunderstood, now simply being. And in that moment you realize Hades doesn't need followers. He has Persephone, and that's enough. She's here, and the underworld notices. It doesn't erupt in celebration. This isn't Olympus after all, but it shifts, ever so slightly. The silence feels different, not broken, not louder, just softer. The stones themselves seem to listen more attentively, as if they, too, know that the queen has returned. And with her arrival, so begins the seasonal hosting challenge that Hades faces year after year. You wouldn't think the god of the dead would care about interior design, guest accommodations, or polite small talk, and you'd be right most of the time. But when Persephone comes back, the realm must adjust, not dramatically, not like Zeus repainting the sky every few weeks because he got bored. Hades isn't showy, but he does a treat. A new set of fruit bowls appears in the dining chamber. A few tapestries, very old, very tasteful, are rotated in the halls. You notice one depicting a grove of olive trees under moonlight, the threads stitched so finely they shimmer like dew. That wasn't here before. It's not a makeover, it's a gesture. Persephone doesn't ask for these things. She doesn't demand fresh linens or daylight hours or scented oils. But Hades, in his own quietly bureaucratic way, makes changes, because half the year, this place is just a ledger. The other half, it's a shared home. Of course, not everything adapts easily. Cerberus, for one, becomes unusually clingy during these months. He follows Persephone like a shadow with multiple tongues. One head sleeps at her feet. Another tries to eat her embroidery projects. The third just whines whenever she disappears behind a curtain. And then there's the decorative issue. Hades doesn't like flowers. They're unpredictable, messy, and require upkeep. But Persephone? She trails blooms behind her like she's spilling secrets. Vines grow in the cracks of his neatly laid stone. Mushrooms sprout overnight. Orderly but very alive. At one point, Hades found a full apple sapling growing in the cracks beside his throne. He didn't remove it. He just shifted his chair slightly to the left and added root intrusion to the day's incident report. Historians still argue whether this seasonal shift mirrors agricultural cycles, the death and rebirth of the land, or whether the myth arose from older goddess traditions absorbed into Greek religion. Some say Persephone was once a spring goddess entirely separate from Hades, and their pairing was a later invention to explain why the earth stopped blooming. Others believe it's simply a poetic metaphor that got out of hand, the ultimate long-distance relationship. Whatever the case, her presence changes the mood. There are more songs in the air, faint, wordless melodies that drift through the chambers like perfume. Ghosts pause their endless wandering to listen. Even the judges seem a bit less stern, as if remembering once that they too had gardens. And yet, it's not all ease, because 6 months is not a lot of time. And somewhere deep in the shadows of their union lies the unspoken truth. Look, she always leaves. She has to. The seasons demand it. The earth calls her back. Mortals need her above. Crops must grow. Lambs must be born. Children must chase butterflies and fall into rivers and offer up tiny prayers to the sky. So during her stay, the underworld becomes a place of balance. Neither joy nor sorrow, neither light nor dark, just fullness, completeness. Like when you hold your breath underwater and suddenly remember how good breathing feels. You watch them one day, walking side by side through a quiet orchard of black-barked trees that only bear fruit when Persephone whispers to them. Hades says little, she says less. But their steps match, the sound of stone against sandal in perfect rhythm. No one asks Hades what he does when she's gone. Maybe he tidies. Maybe he returns every blossom to its dormant root. Maybe he just waits. But during these months, he hosts, not a party, not a spectacle, just her. And if a little moss creeps into the corners of his library, if the underworld smells faintly of chamomile and warm stone, he doesn't mind. It's her season, and even death itself knows better than to interfere with spring. The corridor you now follow smells of parchment and oil lamps. A hallway that, judging by its perfectly even stone floor, has rarely been disturbed by the shuffle of mortal feet. You're entering one of the quietest parts of the underworld, and that's saying something in a place where the loudest sound is usually a sigh. Ahead you see it, a simple black archway with a narrow inscription overhead. It reads, in Greek so faded it looks like it was whispered rather than carved, Lethe. The river of forgetfulness. You might expect Lethe to be a roaring, raging thing, the kind of supernatural current that sweeps memories from minds like leaves in a flood. But it isn't. It's barely a stream. It trickles, calm and steady, through a dark, shallow basin carved into the rock. The water glows faintly, not like fire or stars, but like the last few seconds before a dream fades. And when you kneel beside it, you can feel your thoughts, just for a moment, drift. This is where souls come when they've had enough. Not enough of punishment or wandering, but enough of remembering. After a certain point, the weight of memory becomes too much, even for the dead. The good ones ache, the bad ones scald, and the ones in between, the birthdays, the spilled milk, the favorite bench under the apricot tree, those can grow heavy in their own quiet way. So they come here, one by one, they kneel, they drink, and when they rise, they are lighter, not empty, not blank, but freed. Hades doesn't govern this river. It's older than him, older, perhaps, than time. Even he doesn't touch it. He merely ensures it flows without obstruction and that no soul drinks too early. There are rules. A soul must be judged first, must settle in its appointed field, must reach the moment where it whispers to itself, I'm ready to let go. Only then does the water accept them. Try to drink too soon, and the river does nothing, or worse, shows you everything you've tried to forget. You wouldn't think forgetfulness is a gift, but here it is. Some souls drink once, cautiously. Others return, sip by sip, shedding lifetimes like coats. There's no shame in it. Some memories weren't built to last forever. Some losses, even in death, feel too loud. Historians still argue whether Lethe was intended as a literal stream, a metaphor for reincarnation, or simply a poetic stand-in for grief's gradual fading. Some believe those who drink from Lethe are reborn, their memories wiped to make room for new ones. Others think the river offers no rebirth, just relief. There are myths, too, of mortals trying to bottle its waters. They never end well. Lethe isn't meant to be contained, it's earned. You sit by the edge now, watching as a soul approaches. She's older, or was once, dressed in the faint echo of robes that might have belonged to a priestess, or a teacher, or someone who kept bees and liked the sound of chimes in her window. She kneels. Her reflection in the water is calm, quiet, untroubled. She drinks, and as she rises, there's no fanfare, no flash. It's just a small sigh, as if she's finally set something down she hadn't realized she was carrying. An attendant gently guides her away. She walks more lightly now, a shade that's just a little more shade than before. You feel a strange mix of emotions: relief, sadness, peace. Hades watches these moments too, not often, but sometimes. He doesn't interfere. He doesn't offer commentary. He just observes, maybe with the faintest glint of respect in his eyes, because here, in a realm defined by what it remembers, Lethe is the mercy of forgetting. You dip a finger in, curious. Nothing happens. Of course, you haven't earned it, not yet, but for a moment you understand why someone might. You rise and continue on, the faint sound of the river behind you, soft as breathing, steady as time, and somewhere deep in the underworld, 1,000 memories are being laid to rest, not buried, not erased, but gently unmade. You leave Lethe behind, but its hush seems to follow you, a muffled quiet that settles into your bones like dust in an old library. The air grows cooler again, not icy, but deliberate, a reminder that you're heading toward a different kind of place now, not cruel, not chaotic, just deep. The path slopes downward, curling into a long arc of gray stone. The torches here burn blue, their flames tall and thin, like they're too polite to flicker. And after several dozen steps, you see it, a wall, not an ordinary one. This is the border of Tartarus, a place many have heard of, few have seen, and absolutely no one visits voluntarily. This isn't hell. There's no fire lake, no devils with pitchforks. Just distance. Tartarus is a pocket of the cosmos, so far removed from everything else. It feels like it forgot how to echo. It's not punishment in the theatrical sense. It's isolation perfected. And Hades, he doesn't run Tartarus. This surprises people. They assume the god of the underworld must be its warden, striding around with keys and decrees. But no, Tartarus is its own entity, a force of primordial justice. Hades doesn't assign souls here. He just maintains the locks. Still, he visits. Not often, but when he does, the gates recognize him. You approach now, cautiously. There's no doorman, no guard, just a gate of black iron, covered in geometric symbols that seem to shift when you're not looking. The metal pulses faintly, not heat, but pressure, like it's holding something back. Behind it lies the pit. It stretches forever downward, the light disappearing after just a few meters. You can't see its floor because it doesn't really have one, just layers of time, sinking, drifting, swallowing. This is where the titans are, the ones who fought the gods and lost, buried not under earth, but beneath remembrance itself. You peer through the gate, and for a second, only a second, you think you hear a voice, a groan, a sigh, a cosmic shrug. Whatever it is, it's not for you. Hades stands nearby, watching you with an expression that might be interpreted as, "You sure you want to look longer?" You don't. He steps forward, raises a hand, not dramatically, just a flick of the wrist. The gate doesn't open, but it acknowledges him. A ripple travels through the iron. A low chime sounds, almost too deep to hear. Hades nods once, turns, and walks away. And you realize that's all. He doesn't torment anyone here. He doesn't remind them why they're here. He doesn't have to. Tartarus remembers for him. Historians still argue whether Tartarus is a location, a deity, or a cosmic metaphor, a holding cell for mythic guilt. Plato imagined it as a sorting ground for unjust souls. Hesiod described it as a void beneath the void, and some ancient cults whispered that Tartarus held not just the wicked, but also the dangerously forgotten, those whose stories were so corrupted no judge dared sort them. You pull back from the gate. The path up feels longer than the path down. It's not until you've taken at least 20 steps that you notice something, the silence behind you. It's heavier now, like a door closed, and the air sighed in relief. Hades doesn't look back. He's already walking. You catch up to him. He doesn't say anything. He doesn't need to. His presence tells you enough. This was necessary. Not all realms in the underworld are meant to be explored. Some are just meant to be contained. And Tartarus, deep, quiet, endless Tartarus, is the place where stories that once thundered are now just soft murmurs in the dark. You glance behind you one last time, but the gate is gone. Only the path remains, winding upward, softly lit, like nothing terrifying ever happened at all. The climb from Tartarus takes time, not because of distance, but because the silence clings. It sticks to your clothes, your thoughts, like a fog made of forgotten names. Hades walks ahead, unbothered. He's used to it. The echo that isn't quite an echo, the hush that doesn't lift until you're well out of range. Eventually, the path levels out, and then you hear it. The gentle sound of footsteps, dozens, maybe hundreds, slow and steady, not rushed, not dragging, just moving. You've arrived at the Asphodel Meadows. This is where most souls end up, not the glorious warriors destined for Elysium, not the treacherous condemned to Tartarus, but the vast in-between, those who lived quiet, average lives, neither saints nor scoundrels, are laid to rest here in this pale, dreaming plain. And calling it a meadow isn't poetic exaggeration. It really is a field, rolling and endless, covered in pale gray grass that sways without wind. Sparse trees dot the horizon, their leaves translucent, their roots humming with something old and deep. The souls here wander, not aimlessly, but without urgency. They walk in small groups. Some hum softly, some stare at the distant horizon, as if it might eventually produce something new. A few carry objects, not real ones, but memories formed into shape. A child holds a doll that glows faintly at the seams. A man carries a book that he never finished while alive, flipping through blank pages. They do not speak much, not because they are forbidden, just because they don't need to. Hades does not visit here often, not because he disdains it, far from it, but because this place runs itself. The meadows are self-sustaining, a kind of gentle holding pattern for those who lived entirely average lives. You might think that sounds cruel, as if average is a punishment, but it isn't. It's peace. This is not boredom. This is the absence of urgency. After a lifetime of striving, longing, regretting, the soul is allowed to simply stroll. Historians still argue whether the Asphodel Meadows were viewed as dull or restful by the ancients. Some poets painted them as a sorrowful fog of half-forgotten lives. Others, especially in later Orphic traditions, saw them as the waiting place before reincarnation, a long pause in a cosmic cycle. Perhaps both are true. You walk slowly among them. None seem surprised by your presence. A few glance your way, but with curiosity, not alarm. You pass a pair of elderly women playing a game with stones and soft laughter. A young man humming a melody that never resolves. The grass underfoot doesn't crunch. It yields. There's a structure in the distance. Not a temple, not a home, just a low, circular platform with a few benches and a column in the center. It's called the Musing Post by those who guide new souls. The idea is simple. If you sit and think long enough, sometimes a memory returns, sometimes it doesn't. Either way, the view is nice. You reach the post, then take a seat. The horizon stretches in every direction. The air is cool and still. There are no birds, no bees, no busy gods shouting from mountaintops, just the steady, quiet rhythm of lives that were lived, and now are resting. One soul walks by with a wreath of flowers on their head. Asphodel, naturally. The blooms sway slightly as they pass. You want to ask how long they've been here, but the question feels rude, as if time means anything now. Another sits nearby, staring into the distance. He hums an old funeral song, one you recognize from above. Though the words escape you, it's soothing, even unfinished. You realize something. There is no judgment here, no applause, no condemnation, just continuation. Hades set this in motion long ago, and he rarely interferes, not because he doesn't care, but because this part of death requires no guidance. There are attendants, sure, silent, gentle figures who help lost souls find the start of the meadow, or nudge someone gently toward the river if they've stood still too long. But mostly, this place runs on its own momentum. It doesn't need drama, it has peace. You rise quietly. A soul waves at you. You wave back. And as you leave the Asphodel Meadows, you feel something you didn't expect to feel in the underworld. Comfort, not because you've found paradise, but because here, even the average life is treated with care. You drift away from the meadows, the hush of contentment still clinging to your thoughts like morning fogs. As you walk, the terrain shifts, subtly at first, then with increasing clarity. The grass beneath your feet thins, replaced by polished flagstone paths inlaid with delicate patterns, spirals, stars, branching rivers. You're approaching Elysium, and yes, the story's got parts of it right. It's beautiful, not blindingly so, not like some marble palace set to an opera soundtrack, but perfectly arranged, the kind of beauty that doesn't demand attention, but keeps catching your eye anyway. Everything here has a purpose. The trees bloom exactly when needed. The air smells like warm bread, lavender, and that fleeting scent of spring water running over ancient stone. The sky, if you can call it that, glows with a soft light that has no sun, just illumination, as if the space itself exhaled kindness. This is the realm of the exceptional dead, the heroes, the sages, the poets who whispered so well. Even the gods leaned in to listen. But not everyone here was grand in life. Some were just deeply good, the sort of person who spent a lifetime doing small kindnesses with no expectation of reward. The kind of soul who never made history, but quietly kept it going. Here they are celebrated, not with parades, but with peace. You notice a garden, not the overly trimmed museum-style sort, but one filled with comforting irregularity. Vines trail along archways. Pomegranate trees shed petals into gently flowing canals. There are people, or rather souls, walking slowly along the paths, engaged in quiet conversation, or sitting alone humming to themselves. And yes, Orpheus is here. You spot him sitting near a pond, strumming something stringed and worn. Eyes half closed, he hums a tune that's probably too old for any mortal to remember. He nods politely as you pass, not stopping his song, not trying to impress. He doesn't need to anymore. You move on and see more of the Elysian lifestyle. Workshops, libraries, not places of toil or duty, but of joy. There's a sculptor happily chipping away at a block of glowing alabaster, not to finish anything, but simply for the feel of it. A writer sits beneath a plum tree, scribbling verses that may or may not ever be read. It doesn't matter. Here, creation isn't about audience. It's about existence. You see Sappho laughing over tea with someone who might be Anacreon. You're not sure. Everyone here glows a little, not like stars, but like contented candles. Even animals are here. Not many, just a few. A dog curled up at someone's feet, a cat weaving through vines, a bird that isn't quite any bird you've ever seen, whistling a melody that never repeats. Elysium isn't crowded. That's by design. You don't earn your way here with fame or loudness. You get here by living with intent. Historians still argue whether Elysium was always part of the Greek afterlife model, or if it evolved over time to comfort those anxious about the finality of death. Some say it began as a battlefield reward, a hero's resting place. Others think it originated from agricultural rituals, where those who nurtured life would continue nurturing it forever. Either way, it stuck. You notice Hades walking the edge of a grove. He doesn't go far in. This isn't his realm to manage. He maintains the gates, yes, and ensures the balance of judgment. But once a soul enters here, they belong more to Persephone than to him. She visits often, waters the groves, reads poetry aloud. Once a soul tried to gift her a woven crown of reeds. She accepted it with a smile and wore it for a whole season. You sit now at the edge of a shallow stream. The water moves slowly, not because it's lazy, but because there's no rush. Across from you, a soul rests beneath a tree, eyes closed, smiling slightly. You don't disturb them. Here, the quiet is almost sacred. You dip your hand in the water. It feels like the moment right before sleep. Not heavy, not drowning, just enough. And you understand now, Elysium isn't about getting rewarded. It's about finally being allowed to be yourself, stripped of urgency, of performance, of pain. A soul nearby speaks, barely louder than a whisper. I never knew how tired I was until I stopped. You nod, and the air nods with you. The path out of Elysium is gentle, not the dramatic exit of a hero, but more like leaving a party that didn't demand your attention in the first place. No one waves goodbye. No one insists you stay. The meadow simply grows softer behind you, like the end of a lullaby. As you walk, the ground darkens again, the colors fading back to stone and shadow. But now that you've seen Elysium, the rest of the underworld doesn't seem so grim. It feels structured, intentional. You pass an archway carved with strange symbols, not Greeks and older, symbols that look like they've been remembered rather than written. And beyond it, the archive. You wouldn't expect Hades to keep records. He doesn't exactly scream bookish. But oh, he keeps them, not for power, not for vanity, simply because someone has to. The archive is not a library in the mortal sense. There are no scrolls piled haphazardly, no dust jackets, no shushing librarians with sharp glares. Instead, it's a massive cavern, cool and dry, with high stone shelves that seem to grow from the walls themselves. Each shelf contains fragments of memory, slivers of lives. A girl's first laugh, a fisherman's final voyage, the moment a poet realized they were in love and immediately dropped their lunch in shock. Not full biographies, just the moments that mattered, not to history, to themselves. You reach for one, a small orb, warm and humming softly. When you touch it, a whisper floods your ears, a lullaby sung by a mother you'll never meet on a night long before Athens even existed. The child in her arms is already gone. The memory remains. You return the orb to its place. There are billions, and only one being who remembers them all, Hades. This is his sanctuary, not his throne room, not his audience hall. Here, where memory is kept, sorted, preserved, not so that others may read them. Most are never touched again, but because these pieces of life deserve to be kept. You wander through rows and rows. Each shelf seems to shift when you're not looking. The archive is not bound by spatial logic. It exists the way dreams do, winding, personal, occasionally rearranging itself just to test your curiosity. You find a collection dedicated to laughter, another to regrets, one glowing cluster that might be an entire city's worth of heartbreak, arranged like constellations, and then a niche labeled simply unspoken. Inside, memories people carried their whole lives and never shared. A final glance, a thought never voiced, a name whispered under breath and immediately dismissed, these too have weight. Hades visits often. He walks the shelves, fingers brushing stones and scrolls and glowing strands. Sometimes he lingers not because he knew the person, but because he wants to understand. He is not the god of punishment. He is the god of preservation. When Persephone is here, she occasionally joins him. She picks up a memory, smiles, then returns it without a word. Once she left behind one of her own, a single bloom of lilac that glows now beside a memory of a boy who once planted a garden for his mother. Historians still argue whether this part of the myth, the archive, existed in older traditions, or if it's a newer embellishment born from a desire to see Hades as more than just a gatekeeper. Some say it reflects the Greek obsession with legacy. Others believe it's simply a metaphor for how nothing is ever truly forgotten. You walk deeper, the lights dim slightly, not out of menace, but to remind you, memory should be treated gently. You pass a shelf labeled almost. The objects here glow a little dimmer, hum a little quieter. These are the dreams that nearly came true, the confessions rehearsed but never spoken, the risks not taken. It is perhaps the saddest corner of the archive, but also the most honest. When you sit on a bench carved into the stone, Hades sits beside you. No announcement, just presence. He doesn't speak. You don't either. The archive whispers all around you, not loud enough to disturb, just loud enough to exist. And you understand something. Hades is not cruel. He is not cold. He is simply the one who remembers what the living forget, and that might be the most sacred role of all. You leave the archive slowly, the murmurs of preserved memory still trailing after you, like threads of half-heard lullabies. Hades does not follow, not physically, but somehow his awareness lingers. You can feel it in the stone beneath your feet. Still, the air feels different now, sharper, a hint of ozone. You're heading into a story the Underworld doesn't often retell. One of the few times Hades left, it wasn't dramatic, not in the way Zeus flung lightning or Poseidon thrashed oceans into tantrums. No grand speeches, no battle cries, just a moment when something above mattered enough to pull him from the shadows. He borrowed a helmet. That's how the story usually starts. It wasn't just any helmet either. It was the helm of invisibility, forged by the Cyclopes, older than most mountains, and less prone to casual lending. But Hades wore it when he joined the war against the Titans, not out of ambition, but necessity. Yes, once, a long, long time ago, Hades fought alongside his brothers, not in Olympus, not from a throne, but in the dust and thunder of Titanomachy. Historians still argue whether Hades played a major combat role or served more strategically, striking from shadows, disrupting plans, vanishing enemies mid-sentence. Some ancient poets describe him as ghost-like in battle, appearing only to sow confusion, then disappearing before anyone could retaliate. Others believe he spent most of the war cleaning up after his more dramatic siblings. But either way, he was there, and the helm worked. No one saw him move, not even the Titans. He drifted across the battlefield like dread, unseen but always felt. And when the war ended, and the cosmos divided itself like slices of uneasy cake, Hades took the underworld, not as a punishment, but as a preference. He liked the quiet, he liked the structure, and he returned the helmet to its place. But that wasn't the only time he wore it. There were other moments, rarer still. You hear of one as you follow this new corridor, a path carved not from stone, but from obsidian streaked with gold. The story etched along the walls glimmers faintly with every torch you pass. Once, in the wake of a great plague, Hades is said to have walked among mortals, hidden, veiled, unseen, not to spread death, to witness it. He moved through cities draped in sickness, not touching, not intervening, just watching as priests whispered prayers to gods who never showed, as doctors bled their patients dry, as mothers carried their children wrapped in linens already stiff from fever. No one saw him, but a few felt something, a breeze with no source, a sudden hush in a room of wails, the sense that someone was listening, not out of pity, but out of duty, and perhaps, just perhaps, out of respect. Hades did not come to claim, he came to understand, and then he returned, always. He always returned, because above ground was not for him, it was too loud, too proud, too enamored with its own messes. Down below, he could manage things, count them, catalog them, ensure that even the smallest soul didn't slip through the cracks. You pause beneath a section of wall that depicts another myth, less well known. A mortal had wandered too far, a philosopher, they say, who sought truth in the deepest caves. He found something instead, a figure in black, seated by a pool, listening to the sound of wind through bones. The philosopher asked questions, the figure answered only one. "You don't want to know," he said, "but thank you for asking." And then he vanished. Was it Hades? Maybe. Was it just a myth? Probably, but the idea lingers, that sometimes the god of the dead does leave, not for glory, not for vengeance, but for clarity. He doesn't stay long, but the world above is not his language. You reach the end of the corridor. A final image is carved in deep relief, the helm of invisibility, resting on a stone pedestal, surrounded by vines that seem to whisper, "Return." He hasn't worn it in centuries. Maybe he never will again, but it's there, waiting, because even Hades, structured, bound, endlessly patient Hades, sometimes needs to step into the chaos, just to remind himself why he left it. You leave behind the obsidian corridor, its golden veins fading into memory as the stone underfoot shifts once more, this time warmer, softer, less polished, not forgotten, but well worn. The path leads to a part of the underworld that feels theatrical, not in a Dionysian, wine-soaked kind of way. No, this is old theater, masked, candlelit, cloaked in poetry, because here the myths are rewritten. You've arrived at the place where Hades got a strange little PR makeover. Over the centuries, something curious happened. As poets grew romantic, as playwrights leaned towards sympathy, and as mortals stared a little longer at the darker corners of existence, Hades the villain slowly became something else, less terrifying, more tragic, less punisher, more misunderstood manager. He didn't ask for this, but it happened anyway. You enter a large circular room, part amphitheater, part library, part rumor mill. Along the walls are depictions of Hades in dozens of styles, crowned and regal, hooded and spectral, young and sullen, ancient and wise. No two match, as all claim authenticity. This is where reputation becomes reality, or at least a version of it. You pass murals painted by Roman artists who softened his features and gave him a golden chariot. You find Renaissance sketches where he broods handsomely beside a wistful Persephone, both posed like melancholic prom photos. There's even one wild 18th century woodcut where Hades is inexplicably wearing breeches and holding a pocket watch. Why? Because people started to reimagine him. They didn't want their god of the dead to be cold marble. They wanted a story. In these retellings, Hades isn't cruel. He's quiet. He isn't possessive. He's patient. He doesn't imprison Persephone. He waits for her like a lovesick librarian. He reads. He listens to tragic music. He probably drinks tea. Historians still argue whether these versions were born from genuine cultural shifts or from simple romantic projection. Some suggest that as societies grew more obsessed with individual emotion, gods had to evolve into reflections of their creators. Others say it's just because Hades looked good in fan art. Either way, he changed, not in essence, but in perception. You step into a small side room. It's dim, velvet-lined, and filled with scrolls, all titled things like The Gentle God or The Silent Husband. You pick one up. It's a 3rd century poem describing Hades as a gardener, tending the roots of the world beneath, while Zeus scorched the skies above. Another scroll is stranger still, dialogues with the dead, allegedly transcribed from conversations overheard in the fields of Asphodel. In it, a soul says Hades once visited incognito to hear how people really felt about him. Apparently, he left halfway through a monologue about his deep-seated emotional unavailability. You put the scroll back. Is any of this true? Does it matter? Because reputation once whispered long enough that it becomes its own reality. And Hades? He never corrected anyone. He didn't storm into temples saying, "Actually, I'm not that nice." He didn't demand artistic accuracy or burn plays that made him seem moody. He let it happen, quietly, the way rivers make their way around rocks. Maybe he doesn't mind being misunderstood. Maybe he prefers it. After all, fear draws unwanted attention. But sympathy? Sympathy lets you observe unnoticed. You sit for a moment on a marble bench beneath a fresco. This one shows Hades standing in a grove, holding a single lantern, while shadows crowd gently behind him. It's not frightening. It's peaceful, like he's leading them somewhere safe. You look closer. The lantern is unlit, because they already know the way. You rise and walk on, leaving the gallery of versions behind. Somewhere, the real Hades probably rolled his eyes once, then shrugged. Let the mortals paint their portraits. He's busy running a kingdom. You leave the frescoes behind, the countless faces of Hades still flickering like after-images in your mind. The path ahead turns sharply left, narrowing into a corridor flanked by low-burning lamps and walls covered in names, thousands, maybe millions. They're carved small, not for modesty, but for efficiency, because this is the registry, the place where every death is recorded, not just the who, but the how, the when, the after. The smell here is unmistakable: ink, parchment, and a faint trace of old wax seals. At first, it seems like no one is here, but then you spot the scribes. They move like smoke, drape-clad, silent, each one hunched over a scroll that seems to unroll eternally from the floor. Quills float midair, writing with no hands. Shelves stretch upward into darkness, filled not with books, but with tightly coiled memories, lives wound neatly into scrolls, labeled and sorted. Hades doesn't write them himself. He delegates, but he reads every single one, not immediately, sometimes centuries later, but eventually he reads them all, not for judgment, not for pleasure, just because he promised to. This is part of the deal, the oldest oath that no soul would pass through his gates and be forgotten, not entirely, not completely, not while he rules. You spot a scroll being filed. It hovers briefly, then floats into a drawer marked Baker's Minor Errors. Another labeled, Fell Asleep During Important Conversations. One reads, Those Who Died Laughing. Another, more worn, is marked, Unfinished Apologies. The scribes never speak, but one nods at you as you pass, as if to say, We see you. There's an old tale inscribed above the entrance to the back room of the registry. It's short. He was the first to notice when a name was missing. He found it. He remembered it mattered. That's all it says. No signature, no embellishment, just a reminder of what this place does. And Hades, yes, he enforces it, not by yelling, not by wrath, but by watching. You walk deeper into the room and notice a particular alcove cordoned off by thin threads of silver. Inside, the scrolls of those whose deaths changed things, not kings or conquerors. Those scrolls are surprisingly short, but midwives who caught a child destined to write the first song, farmers who chose not to sell their land, and in doing so, kept a forest alive, a fisherman who told a story one night at a tavern that made a young soldier decide not to go to war. These are the quiet hinges of history. Hades reads these first. He has favorites, though he'd never admit it. Historians still argue whether this concept of a registry originated in Greek myth or was layered on later through Roman bureaucracy or medieval reinterpretation. Some see echoes of it in Egyptian and Mesopotamian death records, where the afterlife required paperwork. Others claim it's more symbolic, a metaphor for legacy. But here, now, it's very real, and it's enormous. You pause at a large central desk. On it, a blank scroll and a single black feather quill. A scribe appears. They ask your name. You hesitate. You're not dead, not yet. They nod anyway. Still, the scribe murmurs, in a voice like paper folding, Hey, it's good to be prepared. You don't write anything, not yet, but you do sit for a moment, staring at that scroll. What would it say? Would it be filed under worried too much, or maybe tried their best, possibly talked to dogs like they were people? A surprisingly popular drawer, actually. Hades steps into the registry. His presence is immediate, not loud, not startling, just a low recognition that the keeper of records is here. He doesn't scowl, he doesn't nod, he simply moves to a shelf, plucks a scroll, reads for a moment, his face softens. Then he replaces it, and just before leaving, he says something, not to you, not to the scribes, just to the room. Everyone forgets, that's fine, but I don't. Then he vanishes into another corridor, already onto his next task. You rise, and the registry hums behind you, a reminder that in a world obsessed with spectacle, Hades honors the details, the quiet lives, the unremarkable deaths, the ones no one else bothers to remember. He remembers always. You follow him, or rather, his absence, down another corridor. This one is narrower, more personal. The torches dim as you pass, their light replaced by a low, silvery glow that seems to emanate from the stone itself. You've wandered into what might be called Hades's private wing, not his throne room, not a place of state, just his rooms, the ones where he doesn't wear a crown, the ones not carved into myth or poetry. Here, the floor isn't flawless. There are scuff marks, a forgotten cloak draped over a chair, and a faint trail of dog fur from Cerberus, who clearly isn't banned from the furnishings. There's a hearth, but no fire, a table with a chessboard half played. The black pieces seem to be winning. Or you wonder if Hades ever plays with Persephone, or just against himself, maybe both. A bookshelf leans in the corner, filled not with ancient wisdom, but with mundane details, tax ledgers, weather reports from the mortal realm, a record of fig harvests dating back several centuries, just because. There's a robe draped over a low bench. It's black, of course, but frayed slightly at the sleeves, not theatrical, comfortable. You're not sure if you're supposed to be here, but there's no one stopping you, no traps, no enchantments, just a quiet understanding. This is the part of Hades no one wrote down. The walls are etched, but differently here, not with myths, but with moments. A scratch tally of seasons Persephone has visited. A drawing, rough, childlike, of a three-headed dog, signed in a wobbly script by a long-departed soul who apparently adored Cerberus. There's a bench near the wall where someone once painted stars on the ceiling, not the actual night sky, just how someone remembered it. A version, a favorite. This room is not for ruling. It's for resting, and yes, even the god of the dead needs rest. You move to a low table and find a small dish of pomegranate seeds, not untouched, but not fresh either. Just there, like someone sat here recently and might sit again. The seeds shimmer faintly in the low light, red like heartbeats, like memory. A folded note lies nearby. You don't read it. That feels too intimate. But the handwriting is neat, flourished. You recognize the curl of Persephone's script from earlier. You imagine the silence here when she's gone. Not sad, exactly, but deep, stretched, like winter under stone. Historians still argue whether Hades had personal quarters in myth or whether he simply existed as part of the realm, indistinct and unbodied. Most surviving texts focus on his function, not his habits. But newer interpretations, especially among later Greek philosophers and dramatists, sometimes gave him this interior space, a place to think, to process, to not be a god for 5 minutes. And here, that idea has taken root. You walk into the adjoining chamber. It's smaller, unfurnished. The walls are completely blank, except for one single word carved faintly into the stone. Still. That's it. A meditation space, maybe? Or just a reminder that everything down here, judgment, memory, grief, rebirth, flows towards stillness. And Hades, he doesn't resist that. He lets it be. He honors it. You return to the first room. The hearth now flickers. A small flame, more for comfort than heat. A bowl of water has been placed nearby, likely for Cerberus. You can almost hear the soft pads of paws as he wanders these halls at night, checking that everything is still in its place. You sit for a moment. There's no pressure to speak, no narration, just the gentle creak of stone settling, and the sense that somewhere very nearby, Hades is watching, not suspiciously, but with mild curiosity, the way someone watches a leaf float in a cup of tea. Not everything needs an audience. Not everything needs a purpose. Some things, even in the underworld, just are. And Hades, he understands that better than anyone. You rise. carefully and leave the room as you found it. The door closes behind you with a soft click, like a sigh let out through stone. The air is cooler again, and the walls shift, less intimate now, more ceremonial. You're walking through one of the oldest corridors in the Underworld, not by age, but by function, because down here lies the judgment chamber. No, not fire and brimstone, no dramatic declarations, no booming voices crying guilty to a terrified audience of shades. Hades doesn't deal in theater. Judgment here is precise, bureaucratic yet ancient, the kind of system that hasn't changed in eons because, frankly, it doesn't need to. You pass 3 empty thrones carved from black marble. They seem to radiate a low pressure, like seats that have grown used to being occupied by beings larger than life. In temperament, these are for the judges of the dead, Minos, Rhadamanthus, and Aeacus. Each served as a mortal king once. Now they serve still, only now their jurisdiction is universal and their docket eternal. You pause in front of Minos's throne. It is the largest, with a high back carved in labyrinthine spirals, fitting perhaps for a man whose most famous architectural legacy was impossible to escape. He's the tiebreaker. The final say, Rhadamanthus, he gets the virtuous, a soft-spoken stickler for rules, the kind of judge who would absolutely check your commas. Aeacus deals with those from Europe, especially Greece, and has a reputation for fairness that borders on suspicion. No one should be that fair. But where is Hades? He's not on a throne, not even in the chamber, because he doesn't judge. He oversees, he watches, but he leaves the sentencing to others. It's one of the greatest misunderstandings in myth, the idea that Hades decides where you go. He doesn't. He just makes sure it's enforced. You enter the chamber proper. It's vast, circular, and echoing. The walls shimmer with ancient names, layered in text like sediment. Every soul who has ever stood here has left a mark, not intentionally, but by existing. There's a cue, of course. Souls shuffle forward slowly, their auras dim and flickering. They aren't nervous. Not exactly, just uncertain. Most haven't thought about morality in centuries. They didn't wake up this morning expecting a divine audit. But here they are. A soul ahead of you is debating their merits. I only cheated once, it whispers, and I did return that chicken I stole, eventually. The judges say nothing. They already know. The process is quiet, deliberate, a long-lost echo of courtrooms that haven't existed in the mortal world since sandals were fashionable the first time around. Historians still argue whether the Greek concept of moral judgment influenced later religious models, Christian, Islamic, even Zoroastrian. Some say this tripartite judging system was borrowed from earlier Mediterranean beliefs. Others insist it was the Greeks' way of reconciling free will with consequence. What's clear is this: everyone gets judged, kings and peasants, poets and pickpockets. You get your moment in front of the marble, and then the ruling. You don't hear it, you're not meant to, but the soul in front of you nods. Not surprised, just resigned. It turns, and a doorway appears. It walks through, no fanfare, no flash, just movement. Then the next, then the next. You wonder what Hades thinks about all this. Does he agree with every judgment? Does he ever object? Maybe, but he never overrules. That's the point. He trusts the system. He trusts the judges. He trusts that the cosmic machinery grinds the right grain into flour. And when the rare case arises, the truly difficult soul, the one with equal parts kindness and cruelty, with contradictions wrapped in secrets, wrapped in smiles, Hades listens. Sometimes he steps into the chamber, not to decide, to ask questions. He's said to have only ever overruled a judgment once, and even then, it wasn't a pardon, just a delay, a second chance to prove the soul could be more than their mistakes. No one knows how that story ended. You watch as another soul steps forward. The chamber remains quiet, impartial, ancient, and Hades, somewhere just beyond the circle, unseen but undoubtedly aware, waits for the soul to be sorted, because for all his silence, all his shadow and solitude, there is one thing he ensures beyond all else, that justice, real, balanced, and unshakable, remains. You step quietly away from the judgment chamber, the echo of silent verdicts lingering behind you like old dust motes in morning light. The path ahead widens and becomes less formal, not ceremonial or private, just familiar. The walls are plain, the torchlight steadier. This is the common way, the route most souls walk once they've been judged, a corridor not of fear or glory, but transition, a place of passing through. And Hades? He built this part deliberately, not to impress, not to terrify, but to offer a kind of dignity, because what most forget, what even poets gloss over, is that the underworld isn't just a destination, it's a process. As you walk, you notice small alcoves carved into the stone, niches filled with trinkets and fragments, not offerings from the living, mementos from the dead, a comb, a child's marble, a worn sandal, a single chess piece. They're not taken from the soul, they appear when needed, physical echoes of the final things people held dear. Tsugi. You stop at one and find a spoon, dull, wooden, worn at the edges. You can't help but smile. Somewhere, someone's memory of soup was apparently very important. There's comfort in that. And then, without warning, you smell bread, warm, yeasty, a little burned at the edges. You turn the corner and find a small bakery. Yes, a bakery. It's real, or as real as things are here. The oven glows with soft heat. Loaves rise in perfect rows. No one eats them, not really, but the scent eases souls, reminds them of life, of breakfast, of warmth. Hades approved its placement himself. Smell has memory, he said once, and memory is easier to carry than judgment. Cerberus naps nearby, curled in a crescent, one head rising briefly to sniff, then settling again. You scratch the middle one gently. He rumbles contentedly, tail thudding against the floor with a rhythm that could almost pass for applause. You keep walking. Here, the underworld feels gentle, not sleepy exactly, but at peace with itself. There's no rush, no line to hurry through. Each soul moves at their own pace. Some pause at pools that reflect not faces, but feelings. Others rest on steps that don't lead anywhere, just existing for the comfort of sitting. A few gather at murals that change shape, shifting from village festivals to weddings, to quiet moments with books under trees. This is not punishment, this is processing. And somewhere in the heart of it, Hades moves unseen. He checks the walls for cracks. He adjusts the lighting. He makes sure the scent of bread is just right. Historians rarely mention this part. It doesn't fit the grandeur. It isn't poetic. You won't find epics written about the transitional wing of the underworld. But Hades? He knows this is where most souls really spend their time. Not suffering, not rejoicing, just settling. Letting go of breath they didn't realize they'd held. You pass a window, yes, a window, where soft wind hums through invisible reeds. There is no view, just sound, a melody without instruments, like the wind trying to remember a song it once heard in a field. You linger there for a moment. The corridor continues ahead. You follow, and then you find a final room, circular, domed, soft lit, a kind of gentle pause before the soul's final destination, whatever that may be. Here they can choose to go forward, to rest, to linger a little longer. The choice is never rushed. There's a chair in the center and a figure in the shadows, always sitting, always waiting, not to pressure, not to command, to be present. Sometimes it's Persephone, sometimes it's a scribe, sometimes, when the timing aligns, it's Hades himself. He doesn't speak, he doesn't advise, he just stays, because even gods understand the value of being still with someone. And if you stay long enough, just long enough, you'll notice something. Every soul thanks him, not out loud, not with grand gestures, just a look, a feeling, and then they go. Not because they were told to, because they're ready. And that's all Hades ever wanted this place to be. A passage, not a prison. The corridor bends one last time, easing you into a wide open expanse, so still, so quiet, you almost forget to breathe. This is the threshold, not a gate, not a barrier, just a vast, gently glowing field. It stretches in every direction, a seamless blend of mist and shadow, the kind of horizon that doesn't end. It simply continues beyond your comprehension. This is where souls disappear from sight, not gone, not erased, just moved beyond the part where you can follow. You stand there for a while, uncertain whether you're meant to step forward, but then you notice something subtle, a low hum beneath your feet, like distant music played on the strings of memory itself. This place isn't empty. It's brimming, with every good night whispered through tears, every story left unfinished, every echo of a life lived well, or at least earnestly. Here Hades comes sometimes. He was alone, not as ruler, not as husband, not as judge, just as himself, the last watcher. You see him now, not far off, not quite in focus, as though your eyes aren't designed to look directly at him when he's like this. He walks through the threshold field with his hands behind his back, pausing every so often at invisible markers only he can sense. He doesn't guide souls here. They find it on their own, but he checks on it, maintains it, waters the silence, so to speak. And once in a while, just once in a while, he stops, tilts his head, and listens. To what? You can't hear. Maybe nothing, maybe everything. Historians still argue what this part of the myth represents. Is it reincarnation, dissolution into the universe, a return to the stars? Philosophers spin grand theories. Some say it's a metaphor for death's unknowable edge. Others believe it's the place where gods end, too, where even immortals whisper their last. But here now, standing in the hush of it, you know this much. Hades doesn't pretend to understand it fully, and that's why he treats it with reverence. He never rushes a soul toward it. He never follows them in. He just ensures that when the time comes, it's ready. And when you turn to look behind you, you see the journey in reverse, the passageways, the meadows, the rivers, the laughter, the archives, the thrones, all still there, all gently alive. You've seen the machinery of death, the plumbing of myth, the gentle logic of eternity, and you're not afraid, because in all of it, not once did Hades raise his voice. Not once did he close a door behind you. He's still watching, somewhere behind your shoulder, like the shadow of a lighthouse, not commanding, just making sure the light stays on. You breathe in, you step forward, not into the mist, not toward a final end, but back onto the corridor, back into this dreamlike walk. One last glance behind. Stillness, not absence, stillness. And that's when you finally understand what Hades has always known. Stillness isn't the end of something. It's the space between everything that matters. Now that our journey has slowed, let your breath do the same. Let the air feel softer around you, as though the stone walls of the underworld have melted into the quiet folds of your blanket, into the gentle rhythm of your pulse beneath the covers. Picture that last corridor again, the one without walls, the one where everything eases into mist and hush and stars. You don't need to walk further, you've seen enough. You've wandered with gods and ghosts, past rivers and memory, through judgment and gardens, and into the rooms where silence sits like an old friend. Feel how quiet that part of you is now, not empty, just still. If your thoughts begin to drift, let them. Let them follow the whisper of Lethe, the scent of bread, the soft scratch of Cerberus's claws on the stone floors of the dark. Let them soften and fade like footsteps disappearing into the asphodel grass. You are not being watched. You are not being judged. You are simply resting. And somewhere, in the deep of the myth, Hades is at his desk, reading quietly under low torchlight. He is not worried. He is not alone. He is simply doing what he always does, remembering. So let the hush take hold now. Let the night cradle you. And may your dreams be as orderly, as curious, and as oddly gentle as the underworld itself. Good night.